So I've spent over 1,000 hours making games with AI and I still can't code. I don't know how to and I don't intend to learn it. And I've basically been using AI to do everything from all the code to the images, to the music, sound effects, and more. I wanted to use this video just to talk a bit more about sort of what that looks like and how I've been doing it. Currently, I have one release game, Scarred Steel, and I'm close to releasing the demo for my second game, Primus. And both projects have used AI to basically do everything. And I wanted to obviously answer a few questions in terms of what that looks like. So I first got into game development when leaving my previous B2B lead gen business. At the time, I wanted something more creative to work on, and I'd played video games since I was very young, and so I felt that if I could obviously, make a game, that would be cool. But it didn't really feel that realistic to me, because obviously with game development, there's obviously the very big hurdle in terms of having to learn lots around code. And so I figured that actually, if I could use AI as a way of being able to actually make games, that would be cool. I didn't really have a detailed plan at the time. It was more just throwing myself at it. I did start off with ChatGPT, but tools evolved over time. And after about over 700 hours of work, I was able to release my first game, Scarred Steel. And now I'm developing my second game, Primus. At the time of recording this, I'm ideally close to releasing the demo for it. And looking back, I didn't really think I'd get this far. But yeah, I guess the first really thing to talk about is has it really made me any money? Honestly, it's too early into the journey to really like say that I've made any money. I believe for Scars Steel, I'm like so far I've made like maybe like 70 quid, right? Again, it's a first game and I wasn't really expecting much from it anyway. And if anything, I'm trying to just look at what I make as just steps towards something bigger. And I want to be able to make better and better games over time. So that's really the goal for me, but I want to just be transparent with that. The next thing is, what AI actually made possible. So I think really the greatest thing with AI is that it can basically turn your thoughts into reality. That's probably the simplest way I can explain it. Before AI, if you have an idea for, say, a combat system or something like that, it would be very difficult to go about building that other than obviously doing lots of research and learning. But now, with what I'm doing, if I can describe it well enough and give the input to what I'm now using for code, which is Cursor, it can go away and it can do that. Obviously, the more context I give it, the better it gets it right. But if it doesn't get it done right the first time, usually it's only a little bit of back and forth until it does get it right. And that's really, really important. And, traditionally, someone in my position, would probably need to spend years having to learn that sort of thing, or at least to learn a lot of code in order to be able to do that as well. And for me, like the traditional route with game dev just wasn't the path I wanted to take. I wanted to make games, and AI gave me a way to begin doing that without having to spend, lots of time preparing before I could really start. And I think there's a lot of controversy surrounding AI, and I've experienced plenty of that myself. People have different views on AI in terms of what it should or could be used for. Things like code, artwork, music, and stuff, and that's completely fair. I think my approach has been fairly simple. If I can use AI to make games that people genuinely enjoy, then that's a win for me. Obviously, depending on the genre, that's going to look different. But ultimately, if someone can play one of my games and have a good experience, that's what matters to me, right? And I think just obviously I'm trying to get better at that with every game I make, but that's pretty much that. Now, does that mean that AI does everything for you? Because I use AI for the code, the images, making music, sound effects, sometimes video, right? And so from an outside view and from a very short glance, it might sound as though I simply enter a prompt and I'm pretty much given everything I need. And that's not really remotely how it works, right? Sure, there are aspects of it that you can obviously get AI to do, but there's still a considerable amount of work involved because AI obviously can't put everything together for you simply. Now, is it easier than the traditional route? Absolutely, in my opinion. Now, I haven't really done the traditional route, but I would assume it's definitely a lot easier, right? But again, AI can't do everything, right? Sure, it can suggest ideas, but you're the person that knows what you want the game to look like, right? You want to decide what mechanics belong within it. You need to obviously work out if actually what's in it is enjoyable, and so on and so forth. And I think one of the biggest dangers really is scope, because AI makes it much easier to create scripts and features, which at the same time, although it's great, can also mean that your scope can get way out of control. Like when I think of my first game, Scarred Steel, I had to push back the release date, I think about 2 months or so, because I just kept, ideas kept flowing in. And instead of looking and realizing what the scope of the game should be, I just kept adding things over and over. And so, like, when I was like, 5 days away from, release, like, I hadn't even finished the full game. Like, I hadn't completed it myself. And that's a huge issue because obviously I don't want to release a game that I haven't actually completed myself and then seeing if actually it works for other people. So again, if anything, AI makes self-control far more important. Now, what happens if something breaks, right? What happens if when I'm doing it, something breaks and things go wrong? So debugging is a bit of a weird thing. If anything, again, it's just relying on AI. For me, when I do code, I just rely on a AI tool called Cursor. The simplest way to describe it is that Cursor is pretty much like an AI coding tool that's almost like embedded into my project. I can give it instructions, it can create scripts, edit scripts, delete scripts if I ask it to. And this was what I started using for the last half of Scarred Steel's development, and obviously I'm using it for my current games and future ones, and it is an absolute game changer. And quite simply, when I come across issues, when I get errors that pop up, literally, I will just simply, if there's an error or errors in Unity, I'll copy and paste them all, give them all to Cursor, and literally say, fix these. That's literally it. Fix these, copy and paste them in. And usually after the first try, maybe second, they're all fixed. Right? Now, does that mean everything works exactly the way I intend it to? Well, that's where I need to play test and then refine forward. But that's about it, right? Now, there are sometimes, like, there are issues I've come across where not everything is able to be fixed immediately. But even that aspect, Cursor in my instances, like, it can see a lot of the stuff in Unity. Like, it can see the aspect ratio of my canvas. It can see the like all of the game objects and images that I have in my project, and it can actually link things up for me, and all that sort. So it's actually really quite impressive. But yeah, like a lot of the time, it's the case of like I'm yet to come across an issue AI wasn't able to solve or to help me solve, and that's about that. So that's pretty much that. Now, comparing my first game to the second, I think the difference between Scarred Steel and Primus has been pretty interesting. Scarred Steel was pretty much the project that taught me how to build a game. And, more than anything else, I wanted to prove myself that I could actually begin and complete a game and release it. That game was heavily inspired by Head Roll Reforged, and I did learn a big amount in terms of what was possible by being able to make it. It was also a very messy project. I was learning as I went and constantly expanding the scope, and such obviously did sort of affect the game. With Primus, that is partially inspired by things like Darkest Dungeon. I tried a lot more to focus on the experience and just overall the scope of the project, and trying to make sure that visually speaking and so on and so forth, it just feels good. And I think really the greatest improvement has just come from being able to better direct the AI I use, getting better at explaining that what I want, giving better context, etc. And I think really the last thing is, I guess part of it is like, who should actually try AI game development? So, if you're someone which has been curious about just making games, right? You can obviously throw the AI stuff aside, but if you'd be interested in making games, I think AI, and obviously I'm biased, is a interesting route to go down. You don't even have to treat it crazily seriously in the initial stage if you don't want to, but it's definitely something to play around with, at least in the initial stage, right? Like for me now, like I'm a lot more serious with it, and I'm trying to really ramp up the time I spend on it. But yeah, I think really what I like about it is that the barrier to entry has never been lower, right? Being able to create, for example, your first tiny game or prototype is just considerably easier than, what it has been in the past. That doesn't necessarily mean that when it comes to making a polished commercial game that's going to be easy, and obviously I'm still yet to make anything successful by any means. But I think just getting started is really accessible, and that's just really encouraging. You can start with a small idea, attempt to build it, and learn through the process. Um, and that's that, right? But again, you still need the patience. You still need to be willing to test it and to turn up consistently to it. I think that's just arguably one of the biggest things. But I think that honestly, just about anyone can look at doing it, even if you dedicate maybe, you know, like I don't know, 5 to 10 hours a week. Obviously it can depend. Just to play around with it, you'd be surprised what you could put together. I think really the last thing to talk about is obviously the controversy around AI with video games. And obviously there is a lot, right? Some people simply dislike a game because they discovered AI was involved. Other people, will have more specific controversies, for example, around art style. I've had some people talk about how, it's like mimicry and it's fake and whatever. And I can't really control those opinions. I think really the way I see AI is an ability for me to put my ideas into action, I guess. And for me, I've just been trying to be as open as possible with my use with AI. Like I'm not trying to hide it. I know there's other like developers that I sort of see that might be a little like more secretive of it. For me, I'm just being super open. Obviously, I'm using a lot of AI, but I think really, when push comes to shove, all I'm really trying to do is be able to make the best game that I can with the approach I'm currently doing. Realistically, right, the first 4 or 5 games I make are probably not going to be incredible. I want them to be, but like there is a bit of like I imagine there is a bit more learning for me to look at. Um, but yeah, I think the important thing for me is just improving with every project, right? I want every game to feel polished, and ideally over time, the game should improve themselves. And I think, after about 1,000 hours, I think that AI game development really can be something which is viable for a lot of people, right? AI doesn't necessarily have the full vision for the game, but I think, given, if you can give it the right ideas and the right context and you can direct it in a way that works for you, I think you can pretty much make like all sorts of games that you'd actually want to make, and make that something that's quite viable.